Vladimir Putin had everything. A legendary fleet over 2 centuries old, bases in Crimea he believed untouchable, Kalibr cruise missiles, an S-400 air defense shield, and a naval doctrine written to turn the Black Sea into a Russian lake. Against him stood Ukraine, a country whose own navy had been crushed back in 2014 with barely a handful of coastal boats left. And yet, on the night of April 18th and 19th, 2026, something happened in Sevastopol Bay that no military planner in Moscow ever seriously imagined. A country with virtually no warships left walked into the most heavily defended naval base in the region, and in a single operation tore apart the backbone of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. 2 Soviet-era landing ships worth over $150 million between them crippled on the spot. A Podlyot K-1 radar station, gone. Coastal surveillance, communications, patrol boats, fuel depots, all of it hit within the span of hours. Now the Black Sea Fleet, once the undisputed master of these waters, is in a humiliating retreat toward its own shores. Putin's dream of maritime dominance is sinking with every burning hull, and what we're about to show you will completely change how you see modern naval warfare. Let's start with what actually happened that night, because every detail matters. According to a statement released by Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, or HUR, on April 20th, operatives from the special unit Primeri, which translates as ghosts, infiltrated the waters around occupied Sevastopol and carried out a coordinated strike on the night of April 18th to 19th, 2026. Their primary targets were 2 massive landing ships, the Project 775 Yamal and the Project 1171 Nikolai Filchenkov. Both belonged to the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Both were anchored inside Sevastopol Bay when the drones came in. Now, these aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. The Yamal, a Rapucha-class vessel built in 1988, measures 112.5 meters in length and can haul up to 500 tons of cargo, dozens of armored vehicles, and a full landing company of troops. HUR values it at over $80 million. The Nikolai Filchenkov is even bigger. Commissioned in 1975, this Taper-class ship carries up to 1,000 tons of cargo, double the Yamal's capacity, with a price tag of more than $70 million. Together, that's roughly $150 million of hardware hit in a single night. As the Kiev Post reported on April 20th, both vessels have been put out of action. But here's what makes this strike different from everything that came before. Ukraine didn't aim for the hulls. They aimed for the bridges. And this is where the real story begins. Ukrainian forces have developed a precise doctrine in this war, refined attack by attack over the last 4 years. Strike the most expensive, hardest-to-replace component. Don't waste a warhead on the parts that are easy to repair. When they go after air defense systems, they don't hit the launchers, they hit the radars. Because without the radar, the S-400 becomes a blind weapon, a launcher holding missiles with nowhere to shoot. When they go after ships, they don't target the hull. Holes in a hull can be welded, pumps can drain flooded compartments, and a ship with a patched side can still fire its missiles. They target the superstructure, the bridge, the command center, the forest of antennas, fire control radars, satellite communication domes, and control consoles packed into a space roughly the size of a small apartment. Destroy that, and the ship still floats, but it can never fight again. It becomes, in military terms, a pier queen, a 112-meter paperweight. The maritime executive, citing Ukrainian defense intelligence, confirmed on April 20th that the Primeri drones struck the topsides of both the Yamal and the Filchenkov, not the waterline. Not the engine room, the bridges. And what went up in those explosions wasn't just plating. It was decades of Soviet electronics that Russia can no longer even manufacture domestically. Some of those radars and consoles were built in factories that have not existed as functioning plants since 1991. Ukrainian military observer Alexander Kovalenko of the group Information Resistance summed up the result in one devastating line. "These ships," he said, "are now nothing more than museum pieces." And Kovalenko was being literal, not poetic. We'll get to why in a moment. Because what happened that night in Sevastopol Bay was far bigger than two ships. Ukraine didn't just strike the landing vessels. According to HUR's own statement, the primary operation simultaneously destroyed a Podlyot K-1 low-altitude surveillance radar in occupied Sevastopol, a system valued at roughly $5 million and specifically designed to detect exactly the kind of sea-skimming drones that were bearing down on the fleet. And just hours earlier, on April 18th, Ukraine's security service, the SBU, had already hit the landing ship Azov, damaged a Delphin Communications antenna complex, knocked out the MR-10M1MYS-M1 coastal surveillance radar, and set fuel storage tanks at the Yugtorsan oil depot ablaze. Think about what that combination actually means on the ground. Without your radars, you cannot see the drones coming in low across the water. Without your communications, your patrol boats and coastal batteries cannot coordinate a response even if they do see the threat. Without fuel, nothing moves anyway. Not patrol boats, not tugboats, not repair vessels. Ukraine peeled back the entire protective shell of the Black Sea Fleet in the span of about 36 hours. They didn't just take out the ships, they blinded the defenders, deafened the command chain, and grounded the response in one synchronized campaign. And that's not the worst part for Moscow. Now, let's move into the deeper problem, because this strike isn't an isolated event. It is the latest hammer blow in a 4-year campaign that has systematically dismantled one of the largest navies on Earth. And to understand the 3 scenarios Russia is now facing, we have to look at the structural collapse underneath. The first scenario is the one Moscow fears most, the replacement trap. Can Russia simply build new landing ships to replace what it's losing? The short answer is no, and the long answer is even worse. Large amphibious warfare vessels like the Yamal and the Filchenkov are Soviet-era designs from the 1970s and 80s. Their serial production ended decades ago. At its peak, Soviet shipyards could launch dozens of warships a year, backed by centrally planned industrial capacity, an almost limitless labor pool, and a closed domestic supply chain for everything from turbine blades to radar tubes. Every component, from the steel plate to the last navigation console, could be sourced inside the Union. Today's Russia bears almost no resemblance to that industrial machine. The only new large landing ship program Moscow has is the Ivan Gren class, designated Project 11711, and as Kovalenko bluntly put it in his April 20th interview with Charter 97, the project is deeply unsuccessful. Construction of the lead ship, the Ivan Gren itself, began in 2004. It did not enter service until 2018. That's 14 years for a single hull. The second ship, the Pyotr Morgunov, suffered similar delays before finally commissioning years behind schedule. At that pace, replacing the Yamal and the Filchenkov with brand new vessels would take decades. And Ukraine is not offering Russia decades. It is offering Russia weeks. And there's a multiplier effect that makes this even more hopeless. Even Russia's shipyards aren't safe. The Askold corvette, a modern Karakurt-class vessel, had already been hit by Ukrainian missiles before it could enter service, destroyed at pier during construction. Ukraine isn't just destroying the fleet of today, it is destroying the fleet of tomorrow. Every shipyard capable of producing or repairing major warships in the Black Sea theater is now within Ukrainian strike range. That is not a navy Moscow can simply rebuild when the shooting stops. It is a navy that cannot be rebuilt at all as long as this war continues. But even if Moscow somehow overcame all of that, there is a second scenario waiting, one that almost no one is talking about, and it is the most decisive factor of all. The Montreux Convention. Signed in 1936, this treaty gives Turkey legal authority over the Turkish Straits, the Bosphorus, and the Dardanelles, the only maritime passage connecting the Black Sea to the rest of the world's oceans. Under its provisions, once a conflict is underway, non-Black Sea warships are barred from transit, and even Black Sea belligerents face strict tonnage and type restrictions. Turkey closed the straits to warships of the combatants in February 2022, and it has kept them closed ever since. What this means in practice is devastating. Russia cannot send reinforcements from its Baltic fleet. It cannot move ships down from the Northern Fleet above the Arctic Circle. It cannot transfer a single hull from the Pacific. Whatever Moscow had in the Black Sea in February 2022 is all it will ever have for the duration of this war. Every ship lost is a permanent loss. Every radar destroyed is a permanent capability gone. You cannot borrow, you cannot transfer, you cannot rotate. There is no strategic reserve over the horizon. The math is one way, and it runs in Ukraine's favor every single day. It is a 90-year-old treaty, almost forgotten by most observers, that has quietly become one of the most decisive strategic instruments of this entire war. And if you're watching this and you want to stay ahead of the curve on what's actually happening in this war, not the headlines, but the full strategic picture, hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you the analysis the cable networks won't touch. Now, back to the third scenario, because this one is where things truly break down for the Kremlin. The third scenario is the repair crisis, and it may be even worse than the replacement problem. Even the ships Russia still has in service are in a state of slow, unrepairable decay. The radar and fire control systems packed into those Soviet bridges were built in factories that either no longer exist or are now located on the wrong side of the front line. During the Soviet era, electronics for Black Sea Fleet warships came from specialized plants scattered across the Union, many of them in cities that are now part of Ukraine or have been destroyed in Moscow's own economic collapse. Moscow has lost access to those supply chains permanently. And because of Western sanctions imposed since 2022, Russia cannot legally import the Western microelectronics that would be needed to modernize the systems. China offers an alternative, but as Kovalenko pointed out, integrating Chinese electronics into 50-year-old systems designed to Soviet military standards is an engineering nightmare. Quality is inconsistent, compatibility is poor, testing cycles stretch on for years, and every hour of work has to happen inside shipyards that are themselves on Ukraine's target list. The repair facilities in Sevastopol have already been struck. Novorossiysk, the next best option, has limited capacity and is itself under constant drone threat. On April 6, 2026, Ukrainian drones struck the frigate Admiral Essen while it was docked in Novorossiysk. Fires on that ship burned for over 18 hours. After-action assessments indicated critical damage to its ability to use its Kalibr cruise missiles, one of Moscow's most prized long-range strike systems, effectively neutralized while sitting at pier. As Kovalenko put it, these ships may be able to move, but they will never again be able to fully carry out their combat missions. A ship that cannot fight is not a warship. It is a target waiting its turn. And then there's the fourth and final scenario, the one that ties all of this together. Call it the vicious cycle. The more ships Russia loses, the heavier the operational load falls on the survivors. Fewer ships mean longer patrols, less downtime for maintenance, more wear on engines and electronics. Fatigued ships break down faster. Broken ships are slower, less maneuverable, easier to target. Every loss makes the next one more likely. And the more Moscow tries to hide its remaining hulls in port, in Sevastopol, in Novorossiysk, in the Sea of Azov, the more it concedes that the Black Sea itself is no longer Russian water. And this is where things get truly catastrophic for the Kremlin. Consider the flagship Moskva, the $750 million guided missile cruiser sunk by Ukrainian Neptune missiles back in April 2022. Russia has not been able to refurbish, replace, or even seriously reconstitute that capability in 4 full years. Since the Moskva went down, Moscow has not added a single new large warship to the Black Sea. The fleet is confined to Soviet-era reserves, and those reserves are running out. What this means for Russia is catastrophic on every strategic level. Its Black Sea Fleet, a force Vladimir Putin personally described as the crown jewel of Russian naval power, has lost roughly 30% of its combat assets since February 2022, according to Ukraine's Ministry of Defense in a report published in April 2026. That's not a raid. That's not a bad quarter. That is the systematic destruction of a major power navy by an opponent that doesn't even have a navy. Alexander Kovalenko did not mince words in his assessment. Russia, he declared, has completely lost control of the Black Sea. And Ukraine, a nation with virtually no surface fleet, now exercises more effective control over that body of water than any other country on its shores, including Turkey, the regional naval heavyweight. The geopolitical consequences are staggering. The Kremlin's naval doctrine, built on projecting power through the Black Sea into the Mediterranean and beyond, has effectively collapsed. For years, Russian warships used this sea as a launching pad for operations in Syria, for naval diplomacy in the eastern Mediterranean, and for pressure campaigns against every NATO member on the shoreline. All of that is gone. NATO's southern flank has been relieved in a way defense planners in Brussels could only have dreamed of 3 years ago. Romania and Bulgaria sleep easier. Turkey has been freed from the constant pressure Moscow used to apply over the straits. Ukraine's grain corridor, once choked by Kalibr launches and threats of amphibious raids, now flows more freely than it has in years. But the most devastating impact is on Crimea itself. With the large landing ships crippled, Russia can no longer move armor, ammunition, and troops to the peninsula by sea at anything close to the scale it needs. A single Rapucha or tapir could carry dozens of armored vehicles and hundreds of tons of supplies in one run, the equivalent of a small battalion's worth of logistics delivered in 12 hours. That capacity has been reduced to near zero. Supply is now largely dependent on the Kerch Bridge and a single overland highway through Donbas, both of which are within range of Ukrainian precision strikes, and both of which are constantly being interdicted. This is exactly the strategy that retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, the former commanding general of U.S. Army Europe, has been laying out in interview after interview since 2023. Isolate Crimea, make it militarily untenable, cut the bridges, cut the sea lanes, cut the airbase, and force Moscow to face a peninsula it can no longer sustain. As Hodges told Radio NV in a 2025 interview, the approach is to ensure that Russian planes can't fly, ships can't sail, and there's no logistical support for their forces. That strategy is no longer a paper theory debated in think tanks. It is unfolding in real time, night after night, with every burning hull in Sevastopol Bay. And the deepest impact may not even be military. It may be doctrinal. Ukraine has proven something the world's great naval powers have spent decades refusing to accept, that a country doesn't need a navy to win a naval war. It just needs to understand the battlefield better than the enemy, and to be willing to rewrite the rules rather than fight by the old ones. Naval staffs from Washington to Tokyo to New Delhi are right now pulling apart Ukraine's combat data because the rules of 21st century naval warfare are being written in the waters off Crimea. And the verdict is brutal. billion-dollar destroyers, aircraft carriers, and amphibious assault ships are suddenly deeply vulnerable to cheap, unmanned systems that cost a fraction of a percent of what they're sinking. Radars, command systems, and harbors have emerged as the weakest links in the entire chain. And any navy still betting on Soviet-era hulls and Soviet-era doctrine, from North Korea to Iran, is learning in real time exactly how that bet ends. As the smoke rises from burning warships in Sevastopol Bay, Vladimir Putin's dream of Black Sea dominance is burning with them. Russia has lost roughly a third of its Black Sea fleet. Its shipyards cannot rebuild at the pace required. Its straits are closed. Its bases are exposed. Its commanders are watching a 240-year-old naval tradition die in real time. And there is no way back. The most bitter irony of all is this. Putin launched this war to stop Ukraine from drifting toward NATO. In the end, he has lost his flagship, his fleet, his control of the Black Sea, and his pretense of naval superpower status. All handed over to a country that barely had a navy to begin with. The only real question now is how much more of the Black Sea fleet will still be floating by the end of this year. That is the reality Moscow is waking up to tonight. If you want to stay on top of this war as it evolves, subscribe, turn on notifications, and we will see you on the next